Good morning, everybody. At first, thank you, Mr. Kamal, for your introductory words, not only for that, but also for the invitation that I got from you to be here at the ECR Summer or Autumn University here in the beautiful city of Rome. I really appreciate this opportunity to take the floor here on a theme that occupies my mind from dusk till dawn. Ever since the bloody attacks on the 22nd of March, within a stone's throw from my office at the metro station of Maalbeek and on Brussels Airport, I am eager than ever to fight terrorism. The fight against hatred and violent extremism is a fight we can only win by working together. Domestically, certainly the different security services domestically, but also, and more than ever I think, internationally. Nothing is more important in security issues than getting everyone to move in the same direction. Working together is something that our police and our security forces are doing it every day. And that's not always an easy task because, especially in Europe, we still have the reflex to hide information all too often. But also policymakers should talk to each other and keep their fingers on the pulse. We live in a world where security strategies change at a breakneck speed and should be coordinated. Just look at the way a terrorist organization as IS changed his modus operandi these last months. A year ago, bloodthirsty terrorists who trained in Syria attacked Paris with a sophisticated plan of attack. Last summer, we saw IS shifting its strategy towards so-called lone wolves. Radicalized young people who were raised in Europe are brainwashed in their home country to commit small-scale attacks on IS's behalf. This requires a different approach from our security forces. It is really important that we, across the national borders, update our security strategies. International security conferences, as well as political conferences like this ECR Autumn University, are therefore extremely valuable. We have to stand united in the fight against this evil that is called violent extremism. In this endeavor, we should exchange views, learn from each other, and look for innovative ways to combat this horrible plague. The frequency at which terrorists take us under fire is accelerating, and no country no longer is immune to its threat. We are all in the same boat. The attacks that IS commits are attacks on our values of democracy and freedom, attacks on the international community as a whole. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that the attacks of the 22nd of March really affected our population. Even though, and let me remind you of this, it was not the first jihadi attack in our country. 2 years ago, and it was the day before the elections, the Jewish Museum of Brussels was targeted, killing 4 people, among whom 2 Israeli citizens. As often seen in the past, attacks on the Jewish communities prelude more widespread and indiscriminate violence. I think it will not come to you as a surprise that security and the fight against terrorism constituted an important chapter in the government agreement that we have concluded a few months after the attack on the Jewish Museum. But then, the horror, and you all know it, had yet to begin. The beginning of 2015 was marked by the attack on the editorial staff of the satiric magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris. This terrorist act came as a shock because it was a merciless attack on the freedom of expression. 10 months later, Paris was the stage for the gruesome attacks of November the 13th, hitting people who had nothing to do with politics or ideology, but just wanted to enjoy a drink or a dinner, a concert or a sporting event on a Friday evening. After the horror of November the 13th, we took into account, more than even before, the possibility of new terrorist attacks in Belgium. We started to implement a whole series of counter-terrorism measures at an accelerated pace. But before all measures were completed, the terrorists struck. March 22nd of this year was D-Day for my country. Terrorists made explode several bombs in Zaventem Airport and in Brussels city centre, making 32 victims. Never in my life have I faced something that has upset me in such a manner. I was, however, also profoundly impressed by the professionality of the police and the rescue services, the solidarity of the people, and the resilience that our society has shown in these traumatic moments. What worries me is the fact that these attacks were committed by youngsters born and raised in Belgium. They seem to be vulnerable and receptive to an insane ideology, an incomprehensible call to violence against their own nation. The Belgian authorities are now doing everything to make sure such a tragedy does not happen again. We have a total of 30 measures that we are systematically rolling out at a quick pace, whilst we continue to think about additional measures, as we operate in an environment that changes at breakneck speed. As I already told you, we cannot afford to give the terrorists and criminals an advantage. But to explain all the 30 measures, it would take too long of time and it would be very boring. But I would like to emphasize some of them. For instance, and everything starts with that, significant budgets. We have provided significant budgets in order to make our police forces and intelligence departments, but also the judicial system, gradually more effective. I have to tell you that the Belgian security departments were underfinanced for many years due to the incomprehensible budget cuts by former governments. But we are finally starting to catch up under the centre-right wing government of which I'm part of. We made sure that the legislation with regard to terrorist crimes became more stringent. We have increased the scope in which our police departments can operate when investigating of terrorist suspects. Thirdly, we are making extra effort to protect the most vulnerable populations in Belgium. Buildings and locations, and I'm pretty sure that you see it also in the European quarter, buildings and locations under increased terrorist threat can already be guarded by military troops since the beginning of last year. In coordination with the Jewish leadership in Belgium, we have thus provided for extra protection in Jewish neighborhoods in Antwerp and in Brussels. But there is one specific measure that I would like to discuss at length with you today, and that is the registration and processing of passenger data, the passenger name records. Passenger data are nowadays widely collected by the carriers, but for commercial reasons. An intelligent analysis of the passenger data by the security forces will contribute to a safer society. An effective use of PNR records by comparing them with various databases of wanted persons and objects and predetermined criteria is necessary to prevent terrorist offences and serious crimes, to detect, investigate and prosecute, to promote the internal security, to gather evidence and, where appropriate, to identify accomplices of criminals and to shut down criminal networks. Thanks to the analysis of PNR data, persons can be identified who, before such an analysis was carried out, were not suspected of terrorist offences or serious crimes, and to whom the competent authorities should conduct further investigations. By using PNR data, the threat of terrorist offences and serious crime can be addressed from a different perspective than through the processing of other categories of personal data. The terrorist attacks in Paris on November last year have entailed that the failure of a final approval by the European Parliament of the European Directive for the processing of passenger data was accelerated. European policymakers recognized in the last couple of months that now, more than ever, cooperation in this field will provide an enhanced effect. And I'm of course aware of the important role that the ECR played in this regard. And I would especially like to thank you, your rapporteur, Mr. Timothy Kirkhope, for his efforts on this regard. I was informed that he will soon leave the European Parliament to take up the seat in the House of Lords. He was awarded last month. That is surely a loss for the European Parliament, but I think a gain for the House of Lords. The European PNR Directive was adopted on April the 14th, 2016, and in the European Parliament on the 21st of April by the European Council. But let us be honest, it was a long process. I think the debate within the European Parliament took 5 years, more than 5 years. Terrorists don't wait 5 years before they do their attack. And I think we have to be critical on this process. We have to look at this process. From the Council of Ministers, the demand was already for many years to go on, to make progress on the PNR directive, and it is, according to me, unacceptable that it takes 5 years in the European Parliament. But that just as a little remark. But ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, of course it does not stop with the law being voted in the Parliament. On the contrary, this is where the real challenge, where the real work starts. Will additional efforts be expected from the international transport sector? Of course, that is something that cannot and absolutely will not be disguised. But I do want to point out that with these measures, we, the government, will help to ensure that the risks for international transport will reduce even more. Because in our country, we don't only want to implement PNR for the air traffic, but also for trains, international trains, and also for the international ship transport. But even more important is to mention that similar obligations are being imposed throughout the whole of the EU, and that the United States even set an operational PNR system as a condition to continue to enjoy the visa waiver program. I would still like to give thought to the international aspect of the process of passenger data. As indicated earlier, the processing of passenger data only has an impact when there is a thorough collaboration with the other European member states. On the European level, we choose not to start a big European PNR, but to try and to connect the various national PNR systems with one another. For this purpose, the European guidelines created the necessary framework and awarded a pivotal role to Europol, where the European Commission will help to facilitate the creation of uniform standards for data transmission. The member states themselves will be responsible for reaching out to one another to ensure a strong interoperability of the national PNR systems. This intense cooperation does not only exist on a European level. We also established a cooperation with the US on different levels for some time now. For example, there is the mutual access to each other's national online databases with DNA profiles and fingerprint data via a hit-no-hit procedure and the spontaneous exchange of information on persons of whom one suspects they will commit serious criminal or terrorist offences. The spontaneous exchange of information on persons of whom one suspects they will commit serious crimes or terrorist offences happens through national police contacts between the FBI and ICE and the Belgian Federal Police. As you can hear, we are also focusing on a preventive approach, besides the necessary repressive tools. It is important to identify as early as possible and to follow as accurately as possible people in our society with an extremist ideology, youngsters who get their heads spun around by hate preachers. Which brings us at last to a delicate topic. Certain youngsters in Belgium appear to be prone to violent extremism. It is a small minority of our population, but it would be a mistake to ignore them. The group on which our security departments focused more are the so-called foreign terrorist fighters. Young people who leave for Syria or Iraq to join the fight or who have returned in the meantime, possibly with a mission to perpetrate attacks on Belgian soil. It is no secret. Belgium has more foreign fighters per capita than any other country in Europe. However, the increase of the number of foreign terrorist fighters has dropped significantly by more than 70% over the last 2 years, following the different measures that we have taken. But each departure is still one too many. Special attention goes to the minors among these foreign fighters. Numbers from the Belgian Coordination Unit for Threat Assessment show that our country has 48 minor foreign fighters, one of whom has already returned to Belgium. But I can say to you that since the beginning of this year, so now already for 8 months, there we have no departure anymore to Syria or Iraq. This is not, I would say, a cry of victory. It's more something that we see, but we see, as I told you, the shift of the modus operandi. People stay in Belgium and do more small criminal, are preparing sometimes more smaller criminal attacks, but with the same exposure. The experience has taught me that these youngsters have a very similar profile. Besides the individual motivations that may vary, one can see a clear, typical profile. First, they are born in Europe. They are youngsters from the second, third, or even fourth generation immigrants. These youngsters have had the opportunity to grow up in Europe and to benefit from our education and our social system. Often, and I think in 99% of the cases, they have a criminal past, a past with ordinary crimes, theft, drug trafficking, and things like that, involving in a criminal network. And after having been recruited by IS and after having returned to Europe to accomplish their mission, they use their old criminal network, of which the different activities can serve to finance or to organize the attack logistically. How is it possible that young people raised in our countries get their heads spun around by terrorist organizations, causing death and destruction to countless innocent victims in their own country? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as a minister, I ponder this question every day. What I often say these last couple of weeks in speeches and interviews, I think now is the time to reconquer all of the hearts that we have lost. If we really want our youngsters to escape IS's deadly trap, we urgently need, first of all, to protect and to reflect our standards and our values. We need to identify extremism amongst youngsters at an early stage and follow up young people who have gone off track. In order to do so, our intelligence services must have both feet in the local community and work together with other partners concerned with prevention. And I think about teachers and social workers and so on. Third, to follow very closely all returned Syrian fighters of youngsters whom we suspect to be leaving very soon. This is a combination of a proactive approach by the local police and a tough legislation on terrorism. For instance, one of the measures that was taken is that when we see that people are preparing to go to Syria, I can pull in their identity cards, because maybe you know, with a Belgian identity card you can travel to Turkey, to the border of Syria. So I can pull in, and we did it already on a large scale. I think also that we have the mobilization and the involvement of the people close to these youth, like for instance their parents, in our preventive strategy. Terrorism and violent extremism create huge challenges. Both the federal level in Belgium and the communities and local entities have been committed to addressing them. What it boils down to: the breeding ground for violent extremism in problematic neighborhoods must be removed. We have to do that together, whatever our beliefs or our convictions are. What we have to fall back on now are the norms and values we fought for ourselves for generations. We have to protect those with everything we have got. All people who keep our fundamental standards and basic values at heart across all possible fault lines of ethnicity, religion, social status should stand together. In Belgium, we have set up a plan for the most affected areas in Brussels at the beginning of this year. It gathers 8 municipalities, amongst which the famous, or should I say infamous, municipality of Molenbeek. The plan is a global plan for, amongst others, the police and justice that aims at tackling terrorism at its roots. Strict follow-up of the terrorist foreign fighters, police focus on the activities that finance and that support terrorism, like arms trafficking and falsification of documents, focus on the illegal economy, for instance car trafficking, and not to forget, focus on prevention and anti-radicalization. We choose for a bottom-up and an integrated approach in which prevention, repression and aftercare go hand in hand. And I have to say, I think it was last Saturday night, I was in the streets of Molenbeek with the police, and there is still a lot of work to do. That's the least I can say. But Belgium alone cannot fight violent extremism and terrorism. This is an unconventional conflict, and we have to fight it at the European and at the global level. That's why I take every opportunity at the international level to call for an open-minded cooperation. Let's make sure that our security departments exchange data to the best of their ability. Of course, with respect for the priorities and sensitivities of all stakeholders. But this is the only way to stop this cancer that has already spread all over the world. And I'm an overall realist. And I would like to pass and to conclude on that realism. I know one thing for sure, and this is my firm belief. These terrorists cannot and will not destroy our society. I thank you very much.